In the stillness before dawn, when the world holds its breath between night and day, ancient stones remember. They remember the first sunrise that blessed their faces when mortar was still wet and dreams were carved into every cornerstone. They remember the countless dawns that followed, 10,000 mornings of mist rising from dark waters, of light creeping across battlements like fingers of gold, of shadows retreating into corners where secrets sleep. The castle awakens not with fanfare, but with whispers. First comes the wind, that eternal messenger, carrying with it the scent of distant meadows and the salt of seas beyond memory. It moves through arrow slits and murder holes, through corridors that have echoed with the footsteps of kings and the tears of queens, through chambers where children took their first breath and elders drew their last. The stones feel the wind's touch like an old friend's greeting, for wind and stone have danced together through centuries uncounted. They have weathered storms that split mighty oaks and endured winters that turned rivers to crystal highways. They have basked in summers so golden that flowers bloomed in the very mortar between their faces. From the eastern towers, the first ray slips across the courtyard like a cat crossing cobblestones. It touches the well in the center, that deep throat of earth that has quenched thirst for generations. It illuminates the worn steps where countless feet have climbed toward warmth, toward love, toward duty, toward fate. In the great hall, dust motes dance in shafts of amber light that slant through windows tall as standing stones. Each particle of dust carries within it the essence of lives lived, fragments of tapestries that told stories of heroes, specks of ash from fires that warmed bodies, now long returned to earth, microscopic pieces of bread that fed multitudes in times of feast and famine. The hall remembers feasts where laughter rang against vaulted ceilings like cathedral bells. It remembers darker gatherings where whispered conspiracies were born, where alliances were forged in shadow and broken in blood. It remembers the silence that followed great losses, when even the stones seemed to weep. Above the hall, in chambers that spiral toward heaven like stone prayers, other memories stir with the dawn. Chambers where love was whispered in the language of the heart, where children learned their first words, where scholars bent over manuscripts by candlelight, seeking truth in the writings of ages past. The castle is a universe unto itself, its walls containing not just rooms and passages, but the very essence of human experience. Every emotion that has ever stirred the human heart has echoed within these walls. Every dream, every fear, every hope has found its place among the stones. As morning light grows stronger, climbing the eastern walls like ivy reaching for sun, the castle begins to pulse with the rhythm of awakening life. It is the accumulated life of all the days that came before, the ghostly presence of all who called these stones home. In the deepest foundations, where darkness still reigns supreme, the original stones sleep on stones that were quarried from distant mountains by hands that knew not what destiny they shaped. These foundation stones have never seen the sun, yet they carry within their crystalline hearts the memory of the earth's beginning, of fire and pressure, and the slow birth of continents. They are the steady heartbeat beneath all the castle's stories, the silent strength that allows everything above to stand, to endure, to shelter, to protect. In its depths swim fish whose ancestors watched the castle's first stones settle into place. They are living links to a time when this land was wild, when wolves sang to the moon from the very spots where now towers pierce the sky. On the water's surface, ripples spread in perfect circles, not from fish or wind, but from the gentle percussion of a single drop of dew falling from a gargoyle's stone lips. That gargoyle, carved by a master craftsman whose name is lost to time, has wept these tears of morning moisture for 700 years, watching over the castle with eyes that see but cannot speak. As the sun climbs higher, painting the eastern walls in shades of gold and amber, the first sounds of life begin to stir within the castle's heart. But before we follow those sounds, before we enter the world of breathing, feeling, dreaming humanity, we must honor the stones themselves, these silent witnesses, these patient guardians. They have seen empires rise and fall beyond the horizon. They have felt the earth tremble beneath the hooves of charging armies and beneath the gentle steps of pilgrims seeking sanctuary. They have absorbed the tears of the sorrowful and the laughter of the joyous, until they themselves have become repositories of all human emotion. In winter, they have stood stalwart against winds that could freeze a man's breath in his lungs. In summer, they have provided cool refuge when the sun turned the outside world into a furnace. They have been shelter and fortress, home and sanctuary, stage and backdrop for the endless drama of human life. The morning mist that rises from the moat clings to the castle walls like the breath of sleeping giants. It swirls around towers and through courtyards, carrying with it the dreams of the night just past and the promises of the day to come. This mist is the bridge between worlds, between sleeping and waking, between memory and hope, between what was and what might yet be. And as the mist begins to thin and fade before the strengthening sun, as the stones warm to the touch of light, as shadows retreat to their daytime hiding places, the castle prepares to live another day in its endless life. But this day will be different from all others, for we will witness it. We will walk its corridors and climb its stairs. We will sit at its tables and kneel in its chapels. We will see through the eyes of those who call it home and understand, perhaps for the first time, what it truly means to live within walls that have sheltered 1,000 generations of human hearts. The stones remember everything, and today they remember us. In the highest tower, where eagles once built their nests before stone displaced sky, Lord Edmund Fitzwilliam wakes as his fathers woke before him, slowly, deliberately, with the weight of responsibility settling upon his shoulders like chainmail made of obligations. The chamber breathes with luxury earned through generations of shrewd alliances and careful warfare. Tapestries from distant Byzantium hang upon walls thick enough to withstand siege engines, their golden threads catching the morning light and throwing it back in patterns that tell stories of conquests, both martial and spiritual. The bed itself is a fortress within a fortress, carved oak posts rising like the columns of a cathedral, supporting a canopy of silk that whispers secrets in languages lost to common tongues. But Edmund rises not from comfort, but from duty that allows no true rest. The rushes beneath his feet have been changed daily by hands he has never seen, yet he feels their care in every step. Upon a table of polished elm sit the instruments of his authority, seals that can alter the fate of hundreds with a single press into warm wax, documents that bear witness to treaties that stretch across kingdoms, maps marked with the boundaries of his domain and the aspirations of his enemies. His morning ablutions are ritual as much as necessity. Water in a silver basin reflects a face that bears the marks of decision lines around eyes that have seen too much, a mouth set in the permanent suggestion of a frown that comes from holding other lives in constant balance. The soap carries the scent of lavender and rosemary, but even these gentle fragrances cannot entirely mask the metallic taste of responsibility that clings to him like morning mist. Edmund dresses not merely in clothes, but in the visible symbols of authority that his people need to see. The fine wool of his tunic speaks of prosperity that trickles down through the castle's hierarchy. The silver threads woven through the fabric catch light and throw it back like tiny stars, reminding all who see him that his position comes from sources higher than mere mortal ambition. The belt that encircles his waist bears not just his eating knife and purse, but the keys to chambers where decisions are made that ripple outward like stones cast into still water. The descent from his private tower to the Great Hall is a journey through layers of responsibility. Each step down brings him closer to the weight of daily governance, to the needs and wants and fears of the hundreds who depend upon his wisdom. The spiral stairs are worn smooth by centuries of such descents, each lord who came before him leaving his mark in the gentle depression of stone worn by purposeful feet. The Great Hall awaits him like a stage prepared for eternal performance. Here, beneath vaulted ceilings that reach toward heaven itself, the daily drama of lordship unfolds with all the gravity of ancient ritual. A lord's chair too grand to be called merely a seat, too humble to be termed a throne, sits upon a dais, raised just enough to remind all present that justice flows downward like water finding its course. The first petitioners are already assembled, their faces carrying the particular expression of those who must ask for what they cannot take. A miller seeks permission to rebuild his wheel, damaged by the spring floods that turned the river into a brown serpent of destruction. A merchant from distant lands presents goods that speak of journeys across territories where different flags flutter and different laws hold sway. A widow requests judgment in a dispute over land that her husband's death has left unclear, her eyes holding the particular desperation of those who understand that winter cares nothing for legal technicalities. Edmund listens to each with the attention that his position demands, his mind weighing not just the immediate requests, but the longer consequences that stretch into futures he may never see. For every decision he makes here in this hall will outlive him, carved into the lives of generations yet unborn like words carved into stone. The morning light that streams through windows set high in the walls illuminates more than faces and petitions. It reveals the accumulated weight of tradition that informs every choice, every word, every gesture. The banners that hang from the walls are not mere decoration, but genealogies made visible, each device and colour telling the story of alliances forged in blood and honour, of oaths sworn and kept across centuries of change. When Edmund speaks, his voice carries with it the authority of all who came before him. The words he chooses are weighed like gold, for in this place, at this time, speech has the power to alter destinies. A word of approval can turn a struggling merchant into a wealthy trader. A word of disapproval can reduce a proud knight to a landless wanderer. A word of wisdom can prevent conflicts that might otherwise water the earth with blood. Between the formal audiences, Edmund moves through chambers where the real work of lordship unfolds away from public eyes. Here, with advisors whose loyalty has been tested in the crucible of crisis, he reviews reports that tell the true story of his domain. Grain stores that must last through winter and into the uncertain months of early spring. The condition of the road that connects his lands to the great trade routes where wealth and ideas flow like rivers carrying gold. The mood of neighbouring lords who might be allies today and enemies tomorrow, depending upon the shifting winds of politics and ambition. The maps spread across his council table tell stories that change with each passing season. Rivers alter their courses, leaving some mills without water and creating new opportunities for others. Forests grow or shrink depending upon the needs of growing populations. Boundaries shift with marriages and deaths, with victories and defeats, with the complex dance of feudal obligation that binds the land together like the mortar between stones. In the private moments between public duties, Edmund allows himself to feel the full weight of his inheritance. He is not merely the lord of this castle, but the keeper of its legacy. Every decision he makes will be measured against the standards set by his fathers and judged by sons yet unborn. The responsibility is both crushing and elevating, a burden that would break a lesser man and a privilege that lifts him above ordinary concerns. The midday meal in the Great Hall is another performance in the endless theatre of lordship. Edmund sits at the high table where every gesture is observed and interpreted, where the choice of wine or the warmth of a greeting carries political significance that ripples through the castle community like waves spreading from a cast stone. The food before him is not merely sustenance, but symbol. Each dish representing the prosperity of the land, the skill of the cooks, the success of the harvest, the stability of the realm. As afternoon light begins to slant through the windows at a lower angle, Edmund understands that he is both the most powerful and the most constrained person within these walls. His power is absolute within his domain, yet it is bounded by obligations to those above him in the great chain of feudal loyalty, and by responsibilities to those below him who depend upon his protection and justice. He is the keystone in an arch of human relationships that spans from the highest noble to the lowest serf, and like a keystone, he bears weight from all directions while providing the strength that keeps the entire structure from collapse. It is a position that demands not just wisdom and strength, but the particular kind of courage that comes from accepting that one's life belongs not to oneself, but to something larger and more enduring. Each brings a piece of the great puzzle of governance, a fragment of the larger picture that Edmund must hold complete in his mind. Justice is not merely about individual cases, but about the patterns they create, the precedents they set, the expectations they establish for future generations. As evening approaches and the last petitioner bows and retreats, Edmund allows himself a moment of solitude in the hall that has heard so many words, witnessed so many decisions, absorbed so many human hopes and fears. In the gathering twilight, surrounded by the ghosts of all who ruled before him, he prepares for the evening meal where new challenges await, where the dance of lordship continues its ancient rhythm, where the weight of the crown, visible or invisible, never lifts from shoulders that were born to carry it. The stones remember every lord who sat in this chair, every decision made in this hall, every word spoken in the cause of justice. And they will remember Edmund too, long after his particular struggles have joined the vast tapestry of history that these walls contain. In chambers where sunlight filters through glass painted with scenes of paradise, Lady Isabel Fitzwilliam awakens to responsibilities that require no armor, yet demand no less courage than those faced upon battlefields. Ursola, that most private of spaces, where the morning light is captured and held like honey in a crystal goblet, speaks of power exercised through influence rather than force. Here, tapestries worked by the hands of noble ladies tell stories not of conquest, but of endurance, of the quiet victories won in chambers where decisions are made through whispered conversations and the careful cultivation of loyalty. The wooden floor beneath her feet has been polished by generations of feminine footsteps, each woman who walked here adding her own subtle influence to the patina of authority that gleams like silk in the morning light. Upon tables of carved walnut lie the instruments of her governance, ledgers that record not just expenditures, but the complex web of relationships that holds the castle community together. Correspondence sealed with wax that bears the imprint of alliances forged through marriage and maintained through careful diplomacy. Isabel dresses with the precision of a knight donning armor, for in her world, appearance is both shield and weapon. Each layer of silk and fine wool is chosen not merely for beauty, but for the message it sends to all who see her. The colors of her gowns speak of prosperity and taste. The fineness of the fabric speaks of connections to trade routes that stretch across continents. The subtle embroidery speaks of leisure time that can only be enjoyed by those who have successfully delegated the countless tasks that maintain a great household. Yet beneath the silk lies a mind as sharp as any blade her husband might draw in battle. The morning's first task brings her to the chamber where the household accounts wait like silent sentinels, their columns of figures telling the story of the castle's daily life in the language of numbers. Here, she exercises an authority that touches every life within the walls, from the allocation of grain that will determine whether the stable boys eat well or poorly, to the purchase of fine spices that will mark feast days as different from the ordinary rhythm of meals. Her quill moves across parchment with the confidence of long practice. Yet each mark she makes requires decisions that ripple through the castle community like ripples spreading across a still pond. The amount spent on candles affects not just the brightness of chambers, but the length of evening activities, the time available for reading and conversation, the very rhythm of daily life. The quality of wool purchased for the servants' winter clothing speaks to their health and comfort during the months when cold becomes an enemy more dangerous than any human foe. Between the lines of accounts lies another story, the story of relationships carefully maintained through gifts given and received, through favors granted and obligations acknowledged. A bolt of fine silk sent to the wife of a neighboring lord speaks louder than any formal treaty, weaving bonds of friendship that might prove crucial in times of conflict. A jeweled brooch presented to the abbess of a nearby convent ensures prayers for the castle's prosperity and protection for any who might seek sanctuary in times of trouble. The correspondence that arrives with each day's light carries news from a world far larger than the castle's walls, yet filtered through the particular lens of feminine perspective. Letters from noble women across the realm speak of marriages arranged and children born, of political alliances shifting like clouds across the sky, of fashions and ideas that travel from court to court like seeds carried on the wind. In her hands, these fragments of information become maps of possibility and warning. The news that a distant lord's daughter has married into a hostile family provides insight into future conflicts that her husband's military advisors might not anticipate. The report of crop failures in neighboring regions suggests opportunities for profitable trade or hints at refugees who might soon seek shelter and aid. The children who live within these walls, her own and those of trusted retainers, represent both her greatest joy and her most sobering responsibility. In the gentle rhythm of their lessons, she shapes not just individual futures, but the character of the next generation who will inherit both privilege and obligation. Their education must prepare them for a world that values both learning and lordship, both piety and pragmatism. The girls learn the intricate dance of feminine authority, how to read the hidden meanings in formal conversations, how to influence decisions through carefully timed words, how to maintain dignity while navigating the complex web of relationships that determines their future options. They practice embroidery not merely as decoration, but as meditation, learning patience and precision that will serve them well in the more complex work of managing households and nurturing alliances. The boys learn different lessons, but equally crucial ones. How to command respect while showing proper deference, how to balance the demands of honor with the necessities of survival, how to see their future authority as service rather than privilege. Their training in arms is matched by training in letters, for the lords of tomorrow must be prepared for battles fought with words as well as weapons. Here, in the cool shadows beneath arches that lift the soul toward heaven, she exercises a different kind of authority, the moral influence that shapes the spiritual climate of the entire community. Her prayers are not merely personal, but communal, carrying with them the hopes and fears of all who depend upon her guidance. She prays for the success of her husband's endeavors, for the health of their children, for the prosperity of their lands, for peace with their neighbors, for wisdom in the countless decisions that shape daily life within the castle walls. The afternoon brings audiences with the women of the castle community servants who seek her intervention in disputes, wives of craftsmen who need her support in family crises, widows who depend upon her charity for survival. Each conversation requires the particular wisdom that comes from understanding the hidden currents that flow beneath the surface of communal life. She listens to complaints about working conditions, requests for assistance with difficult pregnancies, pleas for help with children who have fallen ill. Her responses must balance justice with mercy, pragmatism with compassion, the needs of individuals with the requirements of community stability. The herbal garden that flourishes beneath her windows provides both practical medicine and symbolic connection to the ancient wisdom of women who healed with plants and prayer. Here, she tends not only growing things, but growing knowledge, teaching the younger women the secrets of herbs that can ease pain, promote healing, prevent conception, or encourage fertility depending upon the delicate balance of preparation and timing. As evening light begins to slant through the painted glass, casting rainbow patterns across the chamber floor, Isabel reviews the day's accomplishments with the satisfaction that comes from authority well exercised. The household runs smoothly because she has ensured that every detail has been anticipated, every need provided for, every relationship carefully maintained. Her influence extends far beyond the castle walls through the network of correspondence and alliance that she has cultivated like a garden of political possibility. A daughter married into a distant family becomes a source of information and influence. A favor granted to a traveling merchant creates goodwill that might prove invaluable in future negotiations. A gift sent to celebrate a birth or mourn a death strengthens bonds that transcend individual lifetimes. The evening meal in the Great Hall will showcase the results of her careful management, food that speaks of abundance without waste, service that flows smoothly because every servant knows their role and importance, guests who feel welcome because their particular needs and preferences have been anticipated and provided for. But before joining the public performance of noble hospitality, Isabel allows herself a moment of private satisfaction in chambers that reflect her particular vision of order and beauty. The light that filters through painted glass illuminates not just furnishings, but the invisible architecture of influence and authority that she has built through years of patient, careful work. In the growing shadows of evening, surrounded by the evidence of successful stewardship, she prepares to join her husband in the public roles that their positions demand, knowing that her private authority provides the foundation upon which, before the sun has fully conquered the eastern darkness, the clash of steel against steel rings across the castle's training yard, like iron bells announcing the dawn of purpose. Sir Marcus de Vere stands in the center of the yard, his breathing visible in small clouds that dissipate quickly in air that carries the bite of morning cold. Around him, younger knights move through the ancient forms of combat that have been passed down from father to son, like prayers carved into muscle and bone. Each movement speaks a language older than words, a vocabulary of thrust and parry, advance and retreat, attack and defense that has been refined by centuries of men who understood that their lives might depend upon the perfect execution of techniques learned in practice, yards like this one. The training swords they wield are not the crude instruments of slaughter that untrained minds might imagine, but precise tools that require the same delicate balance of strength and subtlety demanded by a master craftsman's finest work. Each blade must become an extension of the arm that wields it, responsive to thought as immediately as fingers respond to the will to grasp or release. The weight and balance that feels proper to one knight may be utterly wrong for another, as individual as the cadence of heartbeat or the rhythm of breath. Marcus watches the younger men with eyes that have seen steel used for purposes far grimmer than practice. In their movements, he reads not just current skill, but future potential. The slight hesitation that might prove fatal in real combat, the overconfidence that could lead to careless exposure, the natural grace that might blossom into the kind of martial poetry that transforms killing into art. Young William, barely 16 and still growing into the height that promises to make him a formidable warrior, shows the particular clumsiness of a puppy learning to use paws that seem too large for his body. Yet beneath the awkwardness, Marcus recognizes the raw materials of greatness: quick reflexes, natural balance, and most importantly, the willingness to endure pain and humiliation in service of improvement. "Your sword is not a club," Marcus calls to the boy, his voice carrying the particular authority that comes from experience earned in the crucible of actual combat. "It is a serpent that strikes with precision, not a hammer that bludgeons with force. Feel the weight, understand the balance, become one with the steel, as a rider becomes one with his horse. The horse and rider, who move as one entity, possess capabilities that neither could achieve alone. The knight and sword who achieve this unity transcend the limitations of both human flesh and cold steel, becoming something new and more dangerous than the sum of their parts. In the armory that adjoins the training yard, the master smith tends to weapons and armor with the devotion of a priest caring for sacred relics. The forge burns with a heat that speaks of powers older than Christianity, of the primitive magic that transforms raw ore into instruments of both creation and destruction. The hammer rings against anvil with a rhythm that echoes the heartbeat of the earth itself, each blow shaping metal into forms that will protect life or end it, depending upon the hands that wield them. The process of creating a knight's armor is as much ritual as craft. Each piece must be fitted to the individual warrior as precisely as skin fits the body beneath. The helmet that protects the head must allow clear vision while deflecting the most devastating blows. The gauntlets that guard the hands must provide protection while permitting the delicate manipulation required for effective weapon use. Marcus himself bears the scars that teach lessons no practice yard can provide. The white line across his left forearm tells the story of a battle where his shield was split by an axe blow that would have taken his head if his reflexes had been a fraction slower. The slight stiffness in his right shoulder speaks of an arrow that found its mark despite the best armor available, reminding him daily that even the finest protection is only as reliable as the vigilance that employs it. Yet the scars are not merely reminders of mortality, but marks of honor earned in service to oaths that transcend individual survival. Each wound was received in defense of principles larger than personal safety, loyalty to lord and land, protection of the innocent, maintenance of the social order that allows civilization to flourish in a world where violence lurks like a wolf at the edge of every settlement. The code that governs knightly conduct extends far beyond mere martial prowess. Strength without honor is mere brutishness, suitable only for bandits and murderers who prey upon the weak. True knighthood requires the marriage of physical capability with moral purpose, the discipline to use violence only in service of justice, the wisdom to understand that true victory lies not in the defeat of enemies, but in the protection of what is worthy of defense. In the chapel where knights kneel before receiving their spurs, the connection between martial skill and spiritual purpose is made explicit. The sword that will shed blood is blessed by the same priests who preach the sanctity of life. The armor that will protect the warrior is consecrated by prayers that acknowledge both the necessity and the tragedy of violence employed in righteous cause. The young men who train in the castle's yard carry within themselves the accumulated wisdom of generations of warriors who understood that courage is not the absence of fear, but the mastery of it. They learn to control the natural terror that comes with facing death, transforming it into the heightened awareness that can mean the difference between survival and defeat. They must learn to fight as units, coordinating their movements like musicians playing in harmony, each man understanding his role in larger strategies that can turn the tide of battles involving hundreds or thousands of combatants. They practice the complex maneuvers required for cavalry charges that can shatter enemy formations, the disciplined withdrawals that can preserve forces for future engagements, the siege technique that can reduce enemy strongholds to rubble. The horses that carry them into battle are partners as much as tools, requiring the same patient training and careful conditioning that develops human warriors. A knight's destrier is bred for size and strength, trained to strike with hooves as deadly as any weapon, conditioned to charge into the chaos of battle without faltering. The bond between knight and horse must be forged through years of shared experience, until each knows the other's responses as intimately as his own. Marcus often tells his students that the greatest battles are fought not against external enemies, but against the weaknesses within themselves: fear, pride, anger, despair. These are the foes that can defeat even the most skillfully trained warrior. Victory in combat requires not just physical preparation, but mental discipline, the ability to maintain clear thinking and precise action even when surrounded by the chaos and confusion of mortal struggle. As the morning training session concludes, and the knights begin the process of cleaning and storing their equipment, Marcus reflects on the paradox that defines their existence. They train for war while hoping for peace, prepare for destruction while seeking to protect what they value most. They are the guardians at the threshold between order and chaos, standing ready to shed blood so that others may live in safety. The setting sun paints the training yard in shades of gold and crimson that seem appropriate to their calling. Tomorrow will bring another dawn, another session of practice, another step in the endless journey toward the perfection that might mean the difference between life and death when the testing comes. In the gathering shadows, the sounds of steel against steel fade into memory, but the echoes linger in stone that has witnessed 10,000 such sessions, that will witness 10,000 more, that stands as silent testimony to the eternal human struggle between the desire for peace and the necessity of preparing for war. The warrior's path is narrow and demanding, requiring sacrifices that lesser men could not endure. Yet it is a path that leads toward honor, toward purpose, toward the possibility of achieving something greater than mere survival. The chance to live and die in service of ideals that outlast individual existence. In the heart of the castle, where stone architecture reaches toward heaven with the same yearning that lifts prayers from mortal lips, Brother Aldrich begins the day as monks have begun days for 1,000 years, with words that bridge the chasm between human frailty and divine mystery. The chapel bell tolls with a voice that carries across centuries, its bronze tongue speaking in harmonics that seem to resonate not just through air, but through the very souls of all who hear its call. The sound penetrates stone walls and wooden doors, slips through arrow slits and murder holes, finds its way into the deepest chambers and highest towers, summoning the faithful to the first office of the day. Prime, the morning prayer that acknowledges the triumph of light over darkness, of hope over despair, of divine order over mortal chaos. The Latin words flow from Brother Aldrich's lips, like water from a sacred spring, each syllable polished by centuries of repetition until the sounds themselves carry meaning beyond mere communication. Deus in adjutorium meum intende, O God, come to my assistance, the ancient plea that acknowledges human limitation while proclaiming faith in divine sufficiency. The chapel itself speaks a language older than words, It's every stone and timber arranged in harmonious proportion that lifts the spirit toward contemplation of eternal truths. The arched ceiling draws the eye upward, beyond the immediate concerns of daily existence, toward the vast mystery that encompasses all creation. The windows, filled with glass painted in colors that capture and transform the light of heaven, tell stories that illuminate both history and prophecy. Lord Edmund kneels in his designated place, the weight of temporal authority balanced by submission to spiritual discipline. His presence in the chapel speaks to the understanding that true leadership requires acknowledgement of powers greater than human will, wisdom deeper than human understanding. The prayers he offers rise not just from personal need, but from the responsibility he bears for all who depend upon his decisions. Lady Isabel occupies her own space in the sacred geometry of worship, her devotions encompassing not just personal spiritual needs, but the complex web of relationships and obligations that define her role as keeper of the castle's moral climate. Her prayers for her children's souls carry the particular intensity that comes from understanding the spiritual dangers that accompany worldly privilege. The knights who fill the nave bring with them the particular urgency of men who face the possibility of violent death as a matter of professional routine. Their prayers for courage must be balanced with prayers for wisdom, their requests for victory tempered by acknowledgement that true triumph lies not in defeating enemies, but in serving righteousness. Brother Aldrich's voice weaves through the assembled congregation like a thread of gold connecting individual souls to the eternal community of faith. His words carry the weight of theological training that encompasses not just the mechanics of liturgy, but the deeper mysteries of divine love, human redemption, and the cosmic drama in which every human life plays its appointed part. The scriptorium adjoining the chapel houses treasures that speak to the marriage of spiritual devotion and intellectual pursuit. Here, illuminated manuscripts preserve not just sacred texts, but the accumulated wisdom of ages, each page a work of art, as well as a repository of knowledge. Brother Aldrich spends his afternoons hunched over parchment and vellum, his trained hand guided by eyes that have learned to see divine truth in human words. The process of creating illuminated manuscripts requires the patience of saints and the precision of master craftsmen. Each letter must be formed with care that borders on worship, for these words carry the power to shape souls and alter destinies. The gold leaf that adorns capital letters speaks to the precious nature of divine revelation, while the intricate marginalia that surrounds the text serves as visual prayer, lifting the reader's mind toward contemplation of mysteries that transcend ordinary understanding. The pigments used in illumination come from sources as diverse as the spiritual truths they serve to communicate. Lapis lazuli from distant mountains provides the blue that speaks of heaven's infinity. Cochineal from exotic insects creates the red that recalls both Christ's passion and the martyr's sacrifice. Gold ground to powder and mixed with binding agents reflects light like hope itself, catching and throwing back illumination that seems to come from sources beyond mere earthly fire. The books that emerge from this painstaking process become bridges between human time and divine eternity. A psalter created here might serve the devotions of generations yet unborn. A gospel book might carry the words of salvation to readers whose names are known only to God. Each manuscript represents not just preserved knowledge, but prayer made visible, devotion transformed into lasting form. The educational responsibilities that fall to Brother Aldrich extend far beyond mere literacy. The children who come to him for instruction must learn not just to read and write, but to think with the disciplined precision that allows truth to be distinguished from error, wisdom from mere cleverness. They study the 7 liberal arts that were old when Rome was young: grammar, rhetoric, logic, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy, understanding that each discipline offers its own window into the divine order that underlies all creation. Latin lessons become exercises in precision of thought as well as language. To translate properly requires understanding not just vocabulary, but the subtle relationships between ideas that different languages express in different ways. The students who master Latin gain access not just to ancient texts, but to ways of thinking that have shaped civilization for over 1,000 years. The music that fills the chapel during the daily offices speaks to dimensions of human experience that words alone cannot touch. The Gregorian chant that Brother Aldrich leads rises and falls with mathematical precision that reflects the harmony underlying all creation. Each note finds its proper place in melodic structures that seem to capture something of the music that accompanied the creation of the world. The therapeutic power of sacred music extends beyond mere aesthetic pleasure. The regular rhythm of chanted prayer provides a stabilizing influence on communities under stress, a reminder that human troubles take place within larger patterns of meaning and purpose. The voices that join in worship create bonds of unity that transcend individual differences, weaving separate souls into harmonious community. As evening approaches and the light that streams through painted windows begins to take on the golden quality that speaks of day's completion, Brother Aldrich prepares for Vespers, the evening prayer that offers thanks for the day's blessings while seeking protection through the hours of darkness ahead. The words he will speak have been spoken by countless generations of faithful souls, creating an unbroken chain of prayer that stretches back to the earliest centuries of Christian worship. The candles that illuminate the evening service speak to the triumph of light over darkness that lies at the heart of all spiritual striving. Their flames dance with life that seems almost animate, casting shadows that shift and move like visual prayers, creating an atmosphere that encourages contemplation of mysteries that daylight's harsh clarity can sometimes obscure. In the gathering darkness beyond the chapel walls, the secular life of the castle continues its ancient rhythms. But here, in this sacred space where time seems to move differently, where earthly concerns yield to eternal perspectives, Brother Aldrich tends the flame of faith that provides meaning and purpose to all the human activity that surrounds it. The prayers that rise from this chapel carry with them the hopes and fears of an entire community. They ascend like incense through stone arches and painted glass, beyond castle walls and clouded skies, into the eternal presence that provides the foundation for all human endeavor. The source from which all true authority flows, the destination toward which all faithful souls journey through the brief pilgrimage of mortal life. In the belly of the castle, where great hearths glow like the forges of creation and copper pots gleam like burnished shields, Master Cook Godwin commands an army whose weapons are ladles and knives, whose battles are fought against hunger, and whose victories are measured in satisfied souls and strengthened bodies. The kitchen awakens before the rest of the castle, stirring to life in the pre-dawn darkness when even the chapel bells still sleep. The first task is always fire-coaxing flame from the banked coals that have slumbered through the night, feeding it with kindling until it roars with life sufficient to heat ovens large enough to bake bread for hundreds, to boil water in quantities that could fill a small lake, to roast meat on spits that turn with the steady rhythm of prayer wheels. Godwin moves through his domain with the authority of a general surveying his battlefield. but also with the care of a father watching over children whose welfare depends entirely upon his competence. The Great Hall's morning meal will feed over 200 souls, from the Lord's family at the high table to the humblest servants who maintain the stables. Each mouth that opens in expectation represents a trust placed in his hands, a responsibility that weighs as heavily as any knight's armor. The pantry stores tell stories of seasons and harvests, of trade routes and careful planning that stretches across the calendar year. Barrels of salt from coastal regions where ancient seas once covered the land preserve meat against the hungry months of winter. Sacks of grain stand like sentinels against famine, their contents representing not just sustenance but security against the uncertainties that can turn abundance into scarcity overnight. Honey from the castle's own hives adds sweetness that speaks of summer meadows and flowers, whose names are known only to bees and children who gather wildflowers for chapel altars. The wooden combs drip with golden liquid that carries within it the essence of thousands of blossoms, concentrated sunshine that can transform simple bread into delicacy fit for noble tables. The spice chest guards treasures more precious than silver tiny seeds and dried leaves that have traveled distances beyond imagination, carrying with them the flavors of lands where different stars shine and different gods are worshipped. A pinch of pepper represents wealth equivalent to a peasant's yearly earnings. A handful of cinnamon speaks of tropical forests where trees grow in soil enriched by centuries of fallen leaves. Each exotic flavor available to Godwin's art connects the castle's tables to the vast network of trade and adventure that spans continents. The bread ovens built into the castle's very foundations like stone wombs require the particular skill that comes from understanding fire as a living force rather than mere chemical reaction. The temperature must be judged not by instruments, but by experience that reads heat through the color of flames and the feel of air that shimmers with controlled combustion. Too cool, and the bread will emerge pale and dense, lacking the golden crust that speaks of proper baking. Too hot, and the outside will char while the inside remains raw dough. The dough itself represents a marriage of simple ingredients transformed by time and technique into sustenance that speaks to both body and soul. Wheat ground in mills turned by rivers that have flowed since before human memory provides flour that carries within its white powder the essence of countless summers. Water drawn from wells that pierce the earth to reach springs deep as underground cathedrals adds the spark of life that allows fermentation to work its ancient magic. Salt gathered from evaporated seas provides the sharp note that makes all other flavors sing in harmony. The dairy, cool and clean as a mountain stream, houses the castle's wealth in forms that speak to the abundance that careful husbandry can wrest from even modest lands. Milk that arrived, warm from the morning's milking, transforms into butter through the patient rhythm of churning, cream rising to the surface like hope floating on the sea of daily necessity. Cheese ages in rounds that will feed the castle through winter months when fresh milk becomes memory and preserved foods mean the difference between survival and starvation. Young Tom, barely 12 and thin as a reed, tends the spit where a whole ox turns slowly over coals that glow like captured stars. His task requires the patience of a monk and the attention of a watchman, for meat that cooks unevenly will provide feast for some and disappointment for others. The fat that drips into pans below will enrich gravies and sauces, ensuring that even the humblest bread can carry flavors worthy of celebration. The Great Hall's preparation transforms the kitchen into a theater where timing becomes an art form more precise than music. Each dish must reach the table at the moment when it achieves perfect temperature and texture, neither too early to grow cold nor too late to keep hungry diners waiting. Godwyn orchestrates this complex dance with the skill of a master musician, his voice cutting through the controlled chaos to coordinate efforts that span from the deepest storage chambers to the serving tables where presentation becomes the final act of culinary performance. The servants who carry food from kitchen to hall move with practiced grace that speaks to years of training in the delicate art of service. Each platter must be balanced perfectly, each cup filled to the precise level that speaks of abundance without waste. The choreography of their movement around tables and between chairs requires the same precision demanded of soldiers in formation, for a single misstep can transform celebration into catastrophe. The high table receives dishes that showcase Godwyn's finest artistry. Swans reconstructed in their feathers after cooking, peacocks that appear to live again in the splendor of their plumage, subtleties of sugar and spice that tell stories in edible form. These elaborate presentations speak not just to wealth, but to the civilizing influence of art applied to necessity, the human desire to transform mere sustenance into beauty that feeds the soul as well as the body. But Godwyn's greatest pride lies not in the elaborate creations that grace noble tables, but in the simpler fare that provides honest nourishment to all within the castle walls. The thick pottage that fills servants' bowls carries the same care as the most elaborate sauce. The bread that appears on every table, regardless of station, emerges from ovens tended with equal attention, whether it will feed lords or stable boys. Here, news travels faster than in any other location, carried by servants who move through every chamber and corridor, who see and hear the daily drama of castle life from perspectives unavailable to those bound by the conventions of rank and station. Godwyn often knows of pregnancies before the mothers announce them, of romantic attachments before the participants acknowledge them, of political tensions before they explode into open conflict. The evening's cleanup requires the same systematic approach as the morning's preparation, for tomorrow's success depends upon today's careful maintenance. Pots must be scoured until they gleam, knives sharpened to edges that can split hairs, work surfaces cleaned until they could serve as altar stones. The kitchen that sleeps dirty will awaken sluggish, unable to meet the demands that each new day brings. As the last embers settle into glowing coals that will provide tomorrow's starting fire, Godwyn surveys his domain with the satisfaction of a general who has won another day's battle against the ancient enemy of hunger. The castle sleeps with full bellies because he and his army of cooks and servants have fulfilled the trust placed in their hands, ensuring that the complex community within these walls continues to function with the smooth efficiency that peace and prosperity require. The kitchen's influence extends far beyond the castle walls, reaching into the surrounding countryside, where farmers and herders, millers and brewers, hunters and fishermen all contribute to the complex web of sustenance that keeps civilization functioning. Godwyn's orders shape agricultural decisions across the region, his requirements determining which crops are planted and which animals are bred, his standards ensuring that quality remains constant across the changing seasons. In the darkness that settles over hearths now banked for the night, the kitchen rests but does not truly sleep, for it remains the heart that pumps nourishment through the castle's stone arteries, the foundation upon which all other activities depend, the source of the strength that allows warriors to fight, scholars to study, and rulers to govern with the energy that only proper sustenance can provide. Beneath the grand chambers, where nobles display their wealth and power, in corridors lit by flickering rushlights and warmed by fires banked low to stretch precious fuel through long winter nights, another world thrives, a realm where dignity is earned through service and worth measured not in gold but in the steady reliability that keeps the castle's complex machinery of daily life running smoothly. Meg Fletcher awakens as she has for 23 years, in the narrow chamber she shares with 3 other women whose lives have become intertwined like threads in a tapestry woven from shared experience, mutual dependence, and the particular friendship that grows between those who face the same challenges day after day. The straw mattress beneath her has been refreshed for autumn, new stalks providing softness that will gradually flatten through winter use, reminding her of the cycle of seasons that governs even the smallest details of life within these walls. The bells that call nobles to morning prayer serve a different purpose for the serving community. They mark the beginning of a day that will be measured in tasks completed rather than prayers offered, in problems solved rather than audiences granted, in the 1,000 small acts of maintenance and care that keep the castle functioning like a living organism whose health depends upon the attention paid to seemingly insignificant details. Her first task carries her to the Lord's chambers, where yesterday's rushes must be gathered and replaced with fresh ones scented with herbs that will sweeten the air and discourage the insects that plague even the finest residences. The work requires skill beyond what those who command might imagine. Understanding which herbs promote restful sleep and which might prove too stimulating, knowing how to arrange the rushes so they provide adequate cushioning without creating uneven surfaces that might cause stumbling in dim light. The chamber pot that requires emptying speaks to the democratic nature of human necessity, reminding even the humblest servant that lords and ladies face the same bodily requirements as those who serve them. Meg handles this task with the same care and dignity she brings to all her work, understanding that true service lies not in the nature of the task, but in the spirit with which it is performed. In the Lady's Solar, where morning light reveals the intricate needlework that occupies noble hands during leisure hours, Meg tends to tasks that require their own artistry. The fine fabrics that speak of wealth and status must be cared for with knowledge passed down through generations of women who understood that beauty requires constant attention, that luxury demands its own form of labor to maintain its appearance. The silk gowns hanging in carved wardrobes carry with them the accumulated secrets of countless fittings and adjustments, alterations that reflect changes in both fashion and the bodies that wear these garments. Meg knows without being told which gowns bring compliments and which remain unworn, which colours enhance the lady's complexion and which fail to flatter, which styles accommodate the changes that motherhood has brought to a figure that once differed little from the girl who first arrived at the castle as a young bride. The children of the castle represent both challenge and joy for the serving staff who often know them more intimately than their own parents. Young Master Edward, heir to all the wealth and responsibility that the castle represents, nevertheless requires the same patient attention to scraped knees and hurt feelings that any child needs. His lessons in noble behavior must be balanced with the understanding that underneath ceremonial requirements beats the heart of a boy who wants to climb trees and splash in puddles like any other child. The serving hall where staff gather for their own meals buzzes with conversation that carries news and gossip through the castle community faster than any official announcement. Here, Meg learns that the cook's assistant has been making eyes at the blacksmith's apprentice, that the groom who tends the Lord's destrier has been drinking more than his share of ale, that the seamstress who mends torn garments has been seen walking in the herb garden with the chaplain's assistant at hours when proper women should be asleep. This information flow serves purposes beyond mere entertainment. The servant who knows which marriage alliances are being negotiated can anticipate changes in household arrangements that might affect her own position. The one who understands which knights have fallen from favour can avoid the political dangers that come from too close association with those whose stars are declining. The laundry, where Meg spends her afternoon hours, represents one of the castle's most demanding yet essential operations. The linen that graces noble tables and beds must be washed with soap made from ash and fat, scrubbed against stones that have been worn smooth by generations of hands performing the same motions, dried in arrangements that take advantage of every breath of wind and ray of sunshine that the castle's courtyards can provide. The process requires knowledge that encompasses both practical skill and something approaching magic. Different stains demand different treatments. Blood requires cold water and salt. Wine needs immediate attention before it sets permanently. Ink can sometimes be lifted with careful application of acids that must be precisely controlled to avoid destroying the fabric they're meant to cleanse. The great washing requires coordination that rivals military planning. Tubs must be filled with water heated over fires that burn constantly for the entire day. Soap must be mixed in proportions that provide cleaning power without causing the fabric damage that would render expensive garments worthless. Timing must be calculated so that everything washes, rinses, and dries in sequence that makes efficient use of both labor and equipment. The evening hours, when the formal duties of noble service have concluded, belong to the serving community in ways that daylight hours never can. Here, in chambers warmed by shared body heat and lit by candles that cast dancing shadows on walls that have absorbed decades of conversation, the real life of the servant class unfolds in all its richness and complexity. Tom the stable boy courts Alice the kitchen maid with the shy persistence of first love, bringing her flowers gathered from meadows beyond the castle walls and enduring the gentle mockery of older servants who remember their own fumbling attempts at romance. Their relationship must navigate not just personal compatibility, but the practical considerations that govern working people's lives. Whether their combined earnings could support a household, whether the Lord would grant permission for marriage between valued servants, whether children born to their union would find places within the castle community or need to seek their fortunes elsewhere. The older servants carry within their memories the living history of the castle community, stories that span generations and provide context for present circumstances. Meg remembers the great storm that damaged the Eastern Tower, the winter when snow blocked the roads for 3 months and everyone within the walls survived on rationed supplies. The summer when plague struck the surrounding villages and the castle became refuge for survivors whose own homes had become houses of death. These shared memories create bonds stronger than blood relationships, forging a community that transcends individual differences and provides support during times of personal crisis. When Meg fell ill with a fever that lasted for weeks, her fellow servants shared her tasks without complaint, ensuring that her position remained secure and her wages continued. When young Tom's father died in a riding accident, the serving community pooled resources to provide for his mother and sisters who lived in the village beyond the castle walls. The skills required for effective service extend far beyond the obvious tasks of cleaning and maintenance. A good servant must learn to read the moods of those she serves, understanding when cheerful conversation is welcome and when silence provides the kindness most needed. She must develop the diplomatic abilities that allow her to navigate between competing demands from different members of the noble family, managing conflicts that could threaten her own position if handled clumsily. The knowledge that servants accumulate through their daily contact with all levels of castle society makes them repositories of information that could prove valuable or dangerous depending upon how it is used. Meg knows which marriages are happy and which exist only for political convenience, which knights are truly brave and which maintain their reputations through careful selection of opponents, which advisors provide honest counsel and which tell their lord only what he wants to hear. As night settles over the castle and the serving community prepares for sleep that will restore energy for tomorrow's labours, Meg reflects on the peculiar satisfaction that comes from work well done in service of something larger than individual interest. Her life may lack the luxury that surrounds those she serves, but it possesses dignity earned through competence, purpose found in essential contribution, and community built through shared commitment to standards that transform mere employment into calling. The darkness that embraces the servants' quarters holds within it dreams of advancement and prosperity, of children who might rise higher in the world, of skills that might open doors to opportunities beyond current imagination. But it also holds contentment, found in the present moment, satisfaction drawn from tasks completed with pride. Peace that comes from knowing one's place in a community where every role, however humble, contributes to the larger harmony that makes civilization possible. High above the sleeping castle, where stars wheel through their ancient courses and wind carries messages from horizons that stretch beyond the reach of earthbound eyes, the Watchers maintain their eternal vigil sentinels, whose alertness stands between the peaceful dreams below and the dangers that prowl the darkness beyond the walls. Sergeant Robert Blackwood has walked these battlements for 18 years, his feet wearing grooves in stone that generations of guards have polished smooth with their passage. The rhythm of his patrol matches the cadence of waves against distant shores, steady and hypnotic, a metronome that marks the passage of time in intervals measured not by bells or sundials, but by the distance between one Merlin and the next, one tower and its neighbour. The walls themselves tell stories written in stone and mortar, in arrow notches that speak of battles fought against enemies whose names have faded into legend, in repairs that mark the passage of seasons, and the persistent work of maintaining fortifications against both human assault and the slower siege conducted by wind and weather. Each block carries within its crystalline heart the memory of the quarry where it was born, the hands that shaped it, the cart that carried it to this place where it would spend centuries standing guard against the chaos that forever threatens to overwhelm the ordered world within. From his vantage point, 60 feet above the courtyard, Robert can see the entire domain that depends upon his vigilance. The fields that stretch toward the forest edge show the geometric patterns of human cultivation, strips of land allocated to different crops, meadows where sheep cluster like clouds that have fallen to earth, roads that connect the castle to the network of trade and communication that links this stronghold to others scattered across the realm like pearls on an invisible string. The horizon draws his attention with the magnetic pull that distant places exert on those whose duty confines them to specific locations. Beyond the hills that mark the limit of the Lord's direct authority lie lands governed by other nobles, some allies whose friendship provides security, others potential enemies whose ambitions might someday bring armed conflict to these peaceful fields. The ability to read the horizon for signs of approaching trouble, dust clouds that might indicate cavalry, smoke that could mark burning villages, the movement of birds disturbed by human passage represents skills that can mean the difference between early warning and catastrophic surprise. The gatehouse below serves as the castle's mouth, the aperture through which the outside world enters the protected space within the walls. Robert watches the traffic that flows through this crucial portal, with eyes trained to notice details that might escape less attentive observation. The merchant who arrives with goods that seem too fine for his apparent means might be carrying messages for the castle's enemies. The pilgrim whose route seems indirect might be mapping defenses for future use. The messenger whose horse shows signs of harder riding than his stated journey would require might be carrying intelligence gathered through means that honest men would not employ. Yet most of what passes beneath his gaze speaks to the peaceful commerce that connects the castle to the larger world beyond its walls. Farmers bring produce that will grace noble tables and fill servants' bowls. Craftsmen arrive with skills that complement those already present within the castle community. Traders carry goods that speak of distant places, spices that have traveled from lands where different languages are spoken, fabrics woven by hands that follow patterns passed down through exotic traditions, tools forged from metals mined in mountains that rear their peaks toward foreign stars. The seasonal cycle that governs all human activity reveals itself clearly from the wall's elevated perspective. Spring brings the controlled chaos of planting, fields marked with the geometric precision of furrows that follow lines established by generations of agricultural wisdom. Summer shows the gradual transformation of brown earth into green abundance, crops growing with vigor that speaks to the fertility carefully maintained through crop rotation and the patient application of organic matter that enriches soil depleted by previous harvests. Autumn's arrival can be read in the changing colors that sweep across the landscape like a slow wave, trees trading their summer green for the gold and crimson that speaks of approaching winter. The harvest that follows autumn's announcement brings its own drama to the fields below. The race to gather crops before weather makes the work impossible, the calculation of yields that will determine whether the coming winter brings abundance or want, the storage decisions that transform immediate plenty into security against future need. Winter reveals the landscape's bones, stripping away the verdant flesh that summer provides to show the underlying structure of hills and valleys, streams and ridges that form the geological foundation upon which human activity builds its temporary modifications. Snow transforms the familiar world into something alien and beautiful, softening harsh edges while making travel difficult and hunting nearly impossible for all but the most skilled practitioners of that ancient art. The guards who share Robert's duty come from backgrounds as varied as the lands that provide the castle's sustenance. Young Geoffrey, barely old enough to grow a proper beard, brings enthusiasm that must be tempered with the patience that effective watching requires. His eyes catch every movement in the fields below, but experience will teach him to distinguish between motion that demands attention and the countless small movements that speak only to the normal activities of a world that never completely rests. Old Marcus, whose hair has turned white during decades of faithful service, moves with the careful deliberation of a man whose joints remind him daily of the toll that years of exposure to all weathers has extracted from his body. Yet his eyes remain sharp as a hawk's, trained by long experience to notice the subtle signs that might escape younger, more eager watchers. He can read weather patterns in cloud formations that lesser observers would dismiss as merely decorative, predict the approach of storms hours before they arrive, estimate with uncanny accuracy the number of riders in a group that appears as little more than a moving speck against the distant horizon. The communication system that connects the walls to the rest of the castle depends upon signals that can be transmitted instantly across distances that would require long minutes to traverse on foot. Horn calls echo between towers, with notes that carry specific meanings known to all who need to understand them. 3 long blasts announce the approach of friends, while the sharp staccato of 5 quick notes warns of potential danger. The great bell in the eastern tower, normally reserved for marking the hours of religious observance, can summon the entire castle to defensive positions with a voice that penetrates the deepest chambers and loudest activities. Fire provides another language of long-distance communication, torches arranged in patterns that can convey complex messages to allies positioned on distant hills. The beacon system that connects this castle to others, scattered across the realm, allows news to travel faster than any horse could carry it, enabling coordination of defensive measures across territories too large for any single messenger to traverse in time to provide useful warning. The weapons that line the walls speak to the evolution of military technology and the eternal arms race between those who attack fortifications and those who defend them. Crossbows that can drive bolts through the finest armor at distances that make return fire impossible. Cauldrons that can be filled with oil heated to temperatures that transform defense into active assault. Stones shaped and sized to fit the castle's catapults, providing projectiles that can shatter enemy equipment and demoralize attacking forces with their devastating impact. As dawn approaches and the night watch prepares to yield their posts to the day shift, Robert reflects on the particular honor that comes from serving as guardian of sleeping community. His vigilance allows others to rest in safety. His alertness provides the early warning that can mean the difference between successful defense and catastrophic defeat. The responsibility weighs heavily, but it also elevates mere employment into something approaching sacred trust. The rising sun paints the eastern walls with light that seems to bless the stone with golden fire, reminding all who see it that each new day represents both gift and obligation, opportunity and challenge, hope renewed in the face of uncertainties that tomorrow will surely bring. Where the outer bailey opens into a world of commerce and craft, where the ring of hammer on anvil mingles with the calls of merchants announcing their wares. The castle reveals its function not merely as fortress, but as economic heart that pumps prosperity through the arteries of regional trade like lifeblood through a body whose health depends upon the steady circulation of goods and services. Master Wilhelm the blacksmith stands before his forge like a priest before an altar, the fire that burns there speaking to powers older than Christianity, older than civilization itself. The primal force that transforms raw earth into tools and weapons, that shapes the very foundations of human advancement through the marriage of heat and hammer, skill and strength, vision and the patient willingness to perfect techniques passed down through generations of craftsmen who understood that their work connected them to the fundamental processes of creation. The bellows that feed air to his fire breathe with the rhythm of life itself, expanding and contracting like lungs that inhale possibility and exhale achievement. The coal that fuels his forge has traveled distances that speak to the complex web of trade that supports even the humblest crafts, black stones torn from earth, where ancient forests died and were compressed into concentrated energy, carried by pack train and river barge to reach this place where they will surrender their stored sunlight to serve human purposes. The iron that waits for transformation speaks its own language to hands trained to read the subtle signs that distinguish good metal from inferior material. The color that the heated metal displays tells Wilhelm exactly when it has reached the temperature required for effective working. Too cool, and his hammer will create fissures that will eventually cause failure. Too hot, and the metal will burn, becoming brittle and unreliable when stress tests its integrity. Young apprentice David pumps the bellows with arms that ache from repetitive motion, but his mind absorbs lessons that no book could contain. He watches Wilhelm's hands with the intensity of a scholar studying sacred texts, memorizing the precise angle at which the hammer strikes, the rhythm that builds gradually to crescendo before tapering to the delicate final touches that transform rough iron into finished art. The horseshoes that emerge from Wilhelm's anvil represent technology refined through centuries of experience. Each shoe must be fitted precisely to the individual hoof it will protect, shaped with allowances for the natural growth that will occur during months of use, attached with nails that secure without causing injury to the sensitive structures within the hoof. A poorly fitted shoe can lame a valuable animal, while a properly crafted one extends the horse's useful life and increases its capability across terrain that would otherwise prove impassable. The weapons that emerge from the castle's smithy carry with them the weight of responsibilities that extend far beyond mere craftsmanship. The sword that will protect the lord in battle must be balanced with precision that allows swift, accurate movement while providing the durability necessary to withstand the shock of combat. The blade must hold its edge through encounters that would chip or dull inferior steel, while remaining flexible enough to absorb impacts that would shatter brittle metal. Agnes the Weaver tends looms that sing with their own music, the shuttle flying between warp threads with precision that creates patterns of both beauty and durability. The wool that provides her raw material comes from sheep that graze in meadows where the quality of grass affects the fineness of the fiber they produce. The fleece must be cleaned and carded with care that removes impurities while preserving the natural oils that provide water resistance and warmth. The dyeing process that gives color to finished cloth requires knowledge that borders on alchemy. Different mordants prepare fibers to accept and hold colors that come from sources as varied as the shells of exotic mollusks and the roots of plants that grow only in specific soil conditions. The red that speaks of nobility comes from cochineal insects that must be gathered at precise moments in their life cycle. The blue that represents steadfastness derives from woad that requires careful cultivation and processing to yield its treasure. Master Cooper Jeffrey shapes staves and hoops with precision that ensures the barrels he creates will hold their contents without waste or contamination. The wood he selects must be aged properly to remove the tannins that would flavor wine or ale in undesirable ways. The metal hoops that bind the staves must be fitted with tolerance measured in fractions that prevent leakage while allowing for the expansion and contraction that temperature changes will inevitably produce. The marketplace that flourishes within the castle's protective walls operates according to principles older than currency, governed by relationships that encompass far more than simple buying and selling. The miller who grinds grain into flour must balance the needs of immediate customers against the requirement to maintain stocks sufficient for times when weather makes fresh grinding impossible. His reputation for honest measurement affects not just his current prosperity, but his ability to continue operating in a community where trust represents currency more valuable than silver. The baker whose bread feeds both noble and common tables must coordinate her work with the miller's production, the dairy schedules, and the seasonal availability of eggs that provide richness to special occasion loaves. The yeast she maintains in her carefully tended starter represents a living link to bakers who worked before her, a culture that has been passed from hand to hand like a sacred flame that must never be allowed to die. The seasonal fairs that bring merchants from distant territories transform the castle's marketplace into a microcosm of the larger world beyond its walls. Traders arrive with goods that speak of places where different languages are spoken and different customs govern daily life. Silk from the mysterious East carries with it the scent of exotic flowers and the promise of luxury that transcends mere material wealth. Spices that have traveled impossible distances bring flavors that can transform simple ingredients into feasts worthy of royal tables. The negotiations that determine prices for these exotic goods require diplomatic skills that rival those employed in formal treaties. The merchant who asks too high a price risks losing the sale entirely, while one who accepts too little may find himself unable to cover the costs of transportation and risk that bringing goods to distant markets inevitably entails. The final agreements must satisfy both parties, while taking into account factors that include seasonal availability, political stability in distant regions, and the vagaries of weather that can destroy caravans or delay ships beyond their expected arrival times. The apprentices who learn their trades within the castle's walls represent investments in future prosperity that will continue paying dividends long after their current masters have retired or died. The boy who sweeps shavings from the carpenter's floor today may someday design and build structures that will shelter generations yet unborn. The girl who sorts wool for the weaver may develop innovations in dyeing or pattern creation that will influence textile production across the region. The guilds that govern various trades provide structure that ensures quality while preventing competition from becoming destructive. The standards they maintain protect consumers from inferior goods, while preserving the reputations that allow skilled craftsmen to command prices sufficient to maintain their families and train new generations of workers. The ceremonies that mark advancement from apprentice to journeyman to master create bonds that transcend individual self-interest, forging communities of craftsmen who support each other through difficult times and celebrate each other's successes. As evening approaches and the marketplace begins to quiet, the prosperity that these skilled hands have created throughout the day settles over the castle like a blessing earned through honest labor and fair dealing. The goods produced within these walls will travel to distant markets, carrying with them the reputation of the castle's craftsmen and contributing to the network of commerce that binds distant communities together in relationships of mutual dependence and shared prosperity. In the eternal rhythm that governs all life beneath heaven's dome, the castle turns through seasons like a great wheel that marks time not in days or hours, but in the deeper cycles that connect human existence to the fundamental patterns of creation. Each season bringing its own challenges and rewards, its own necessary preparations and hard-won satisfactions. Spring arrives like a whispered promise that winter's harsh dominion has finally ended, manifesting first in subtle signs that only experienced eyes can read. The particular quality of light that speaks of lengthening days, the softening of earth that has spent months locked in frost's iron grip, the tentative appearance of buds on trees that have stood naked against winter's worst assaults. Lady Isabel oversees the castle's awakening with the same careful attention she devotes to all aspects of domestic governance. The chambers that have been sealed against winter's cold must be aired and cleaned, their tapestries taken down and beaten free of accumulated dust and smoke, their floors scrubbed with soap that carries the scent of herbs that promise renewal and freshness. The gardens that provide both sustenance and beauty require attention that has been deferred through the months when snow made such work impossible. The herb garden that supplies the castle's kitchen and healing needs awakens from winter dormancy with careful tending that speaks to knowledge accumulated through generations of women who understood the medicinal properties hidden within seemingly simple plants. The chamomile that soothes troubled sleep must be planted in soil enriched with compost that has spent the winter transforming kitchen scraps into nourishment for growing things. The lavender that provides fragrance for storage chests requires careful pruning that removes dead growth, while encouraging new shoots that will bloom through summer's heat. In the fields beyond the castle walls, the agricultural year begins with rituals that connect human labor to divine blessing, acknowledging the fundamental truth that human effort alone cannot guarantee the harvest's success upon which survival depends. The blessing of the ploughs speaks to the recognition that the tools of cultivation require sanctification if they are to serve their purpose effectively. The ceremonial planting of the first seeds celebrates the act of faith that places precious grain in earth with no guarantee save hope that summer's warmth and rain will prove sufficient to multiply the investment manifold. Master Godwin adapts the castle's dietary provisions to accommodate the transition from preserved foods that have sustained the community through winter to the fresh ingredients that spring begins to provide. The last of the salted meat must be used judiciously, balanced with early greens that provide both nutrition and the variety that prevents the dietary monotony that can lead to illness and discontent. The dairy animals that have spent winter in protective shelters can again graze in meadows where grass grows with the vigor that comes from rest and renewal. Summer arrives with abundance that speaks to divine generosity, transforming the castle and its surroundings into a landscape of plenty that makes winter's hardships seem like distant nightmares. The fields that showed only tentative green shoots in spring now display the full glory of human cultivation wedded to natural fertility, grain standing tall and golden in fields that stretch to horizon's edge like earthly images of heavenly prosperity. The great hall's tables groan beneath the weight of fresh produce that speaks to successful planning and divine favor combined. Fruits that have ripened in summer's heat provide sweetness that no honey can match, their juices running down chins like liquid sunshine captured in forms that children can grab with eager hands. Vegetables pulled fresh from earth, still warm from the sun, require minimal preparation to achieve perfection, their natural flavors enhanced rather than disguised by cooking techniques that celebrate rather than obscure their essential qualities. The long days of summer light extend working hours in ways that winter's brief daylight cannot match, allowing craftsmen to pursue projects that require sustained attention and delicate precision. The weaver can work her loom by natural light that reveals every imperfection in patterns that artificial illumination might obscure. The scribe can copy manuscripts with accuracy that candlelight cannot provide, ensuring that future generations will receive texts unmarred by errors that dim light might introduce. The festivals that mark summer's height celebrate not just the season's abundance, but the community bonds that make shared prosperity possible. The Midsummer Feast brings together all who dwell within the castle walls, from the Lord's family to the humblest servants, in recognition that the year's success depends upon the contributions of all, regardless of rank or station. The dancing that follows the feast allows temporary suspension of social hierarchies that normally govern interactions, creating memories of unity that will sustain community spirit through winter's trials. Autumn arrives with the urgency that speaks to nature's warning that abundance cannot be taken for granted, that summer's plenty must be transformed into winter's security through labor that cannot be deferred without risking catastrophe. The harvest that determines whether the coming winter will bring prosperity or want requires coordination that mobilizes every able body within the castle's domain, from children who can gather windfall apples to grandparents whose experienced eyes can judge grain's readiness for cutting. The threshing that separates grain from chaff becomes a community celebration that transforms necessary labor into shared enterprise. The rhythm of flails beating grain, creating music that speaks to successful cooperation between human effort and divine blessing. The winnowing that follows uses wind's power to separate wheat from debris, casting chaff to blow away while precious grain falls into baskets that represent security against hunger's threat. The preservation techniques that transform summer's abundance into winter's sustenance require skills that span generations of accumulated wisdom. The salt that preserves meat must be applied in proportions that prevent spoilage without making food unpalatable. The smoking process that extends the useful life of fish and fowl requires knowledge of wood selection, temperature control, and timing that can only be acquired through years of careful observation and patient practice. The orchards that surround the castle yield fruits that must be processed immediately or preserved through techniques that capture summer's sweetness for winter consumption. The apples that provide nutrition through months when fresh food becomes scarce require storage in conditions that prevent rot while maintaining flavor and texture. The pears that achieve perfect ripeness for only brief periods must be transformed into preserves that concentrate their essence into forms that winter meals can incorporate. Winter's arrival transforms the castle into a fortress not just against human enemies, but against the natural forces that test human resilience, with cold that can freeze exposed flesh in minutes, storms that can isolate communities for weeks, darkness that begins in mid-afternoon and extends past dawn. The preparations that mark autumn's end must anticipate months when stored food represents the only buffer between survival and starvation, when fuel conservation determines whether chambers remain habitable or become too cold for human occupation. The great fires that warm the castle's main chambers require constant feeding, with wood that must be gathered and seasoned during months when such work remains possible. The smaller fires that provide heat for individual chambers must be managed with care that conserves fuel while maintaining temperatures sufficient for human comfort. The techniques for banking fires overnight ensure that morning warmth can be achieved without exhausting precious fuel supplies. The social activities that fill winter's long evenings create bonds that sustain community spirit through months when outdoor work becomes impossible, and human contact provides the primary defense against depression and despair. The storytelling that preserves cultural heritage transforms education into entertainment, passing down wisdom and values through narratives that capture imagination while conveying practical knowledge. The needlework that occupies feminine hands during winter's indoor confinement produces not just practical garments, but artistic expressions that demonstrate human ability to create beauty even under the constraints that harsh seasons impose. The garments that emerge from winter's patient labor will provide both protection and pride when spring returns to make display of accomplishment possible. The manuscript copying that provides occupation for educated members of the castle community preserves knowledge that might otherwise be lost, ensuring that future generations will inherit the accumulated wisdom of ages past. The illuminated letters that decorate copied texts represent hours of patient labor that transforms mere preservation into artistic achievement, creating books that feed both mind and soul. As winter deepens into the months when survival becomes daily victory over forces that care nothing for human aspirations, the castle community draws together with bonds strengthened by shared dependence and mutual support. The celebration of midwinter festivals acknowledges both the year's end and the promise of renewal, marking the point when days begin lengthening towards spring's eventual return. The cycle completes itself with the inevitability of celestial mechanics, but each turning brings changes that ensure that no year perfectly reproduces its predecessor. Children grow into adults who will face seasons with knowledge gained through observation and experience. Adults age into elders whose accumulated wisdom provides guidance for choices that determine community survival. The wheel turns, but those who turn with it carry forward lessons that make each revolution different from those that came before. In chambers where the breath of sleeping children mingles with the sighs of ancient stones, where cradles rock beside chairs that have witnessed the passage of centuries, The true immortality of the castle reveals itself not in its walls, but in the human lives that bloom and fade within its protection, like flowers in an eternal garden, where each season brings new growth rooted in soil enriched by all who came before. Young Lady Margaret Fitzwilliam takes her first steps across rushes that cushioned the childhood games of her grandmother's grandmother, her tiny feet finding purchase on floors worn smooth by generations of ancestors whose blood flows in her veins like a river carrying forward the accumulated wisdom and aspirations of all who shaped the world she inherits. Her laughter echoes in chambers that remember the first cries of dozens of infants who entered the world within these walls, each child bringing fresh hope to a lineage that measures its success, not in wealth accumulated, but in lives successfully launched into uncertain futures. The portraits that line the great hall's walls watch over her progress with painted eyes that seem to follow her movement, ancestors rendered in pigments that capture not just physical appearance, but something of the character that defined each generation's contribution to the family legacy. Sir Robert Fitzwilliam, who built the Eastern Tower during the reign of the Second Henry, gazes down with eyes that seem to approve of his descendants' early display of the determination that has characterized the bloodline for over 2 centuries. Lady Eleanor Fitzwilliam, whose diplomatic skills prevented 3 separate wars through marriages arranged with enemies who became allies, smiles from her gilded frame with expression that suggests recognition of similar intelligence beginning to manifest in features that echo her own across the span of generations. The painted silk of her gown captures light with the same subtle iridescence that adorns young Margaret's christening dress, creating visual connections that speak to continuity that transcends individual mortality. The nurses who tend Margaret carry within their own memories the childhood of her father, their experienced hands capable of reading in infant gestures, the early signs of personality traits that will define adult character. Old Nurse Beatrice, whose own children have grown and established households beyond the castle walls, applies knowledge gained through raising 3 generations of Fitzwilliam children to the care of this newest addition to the lineage. The lullabies she sings carry melodies that were old when the castle's foundations were first laid, songs that connect Margaret to cultural traditions that stretch back through centuries of mothers who soothed their children with the same gentle rhythms. The words may have changed as language evolved, but the essential message remains constant: promises of protection, assurances of love, connections to heritage that provides identity and purpose. In the chapel where Margaret was baptized with water drawn from the same well that has served the castle since its construction, the ancient rituals that marked life's passages continue their eternal rhythm. The baptismal font, carved from stone, quarried during the castle's earliest years, has received dozens of infants born to families whose fortunes rose and fell within these walls, each child entering the Christian community through ceremonies that connect individual souls to cosmic purposes that extend far beyond earthly concerns. The godparents who accept responsibility for Margaret's spiritual welfare represent alliances that extend the family's influence into networks of mutual obligation and support. Lord Geoffrey of Westmarch, whose own heir will someday require similar spiritual patronage, understands that his commitment to Margaret's welfare creates bonds between their families that may prove crucial in future political negotiations. Lady Catherine de Montfort, whose intelligence and piety provide models for the feminine virtues that Margaret will need to cultivate, accepts obligations that may influence decisions affecting her own family's interests. The education that begins in Margaret's earliest years reflects understanding that noble birth brings responsibilities that require preparation extending far beyond basic literacy and numeracy. The languages she will learn must include not just the vernacular that enables communication with the castle's residents, but the Latin that provides access to scholarly discourse, and the French that facilitates diplomatic correspondence with courts, where different customs govern social interaction. The skills that define feminine nobility require mastery that encompasses both practical abilities and artistic accomplishments. The needlework that will occupy her hands during social gatherings must demonstrate not just technical competence, but aesthetic judgment that reflects cultural sophistication. The music that will provide entertainment during evening gatherings must showcase talents that speak to education and breeding, while offering genuine pleasure to audiences whose own accomplishments provide standards of comparison. The young men who will someday compete for Margaret's hand in marriage are already being evaluated by parents whose own alliances were determined through calculations that balanced romantic attraction with political advantage, personal compatibility with economic necessity. The heir to neighbouring estates may possess qualities that would make him an ideal husband, but his family's relationships with the crown may make alliance with them diplomatically dangerous. The youngest son of a powerful duke may lack inheritance prospects, but his military skills and court connections might provide advantages that compensate for reduced financial expectations. The marriage negotiations that will eventually determine Margaret's fate represent the culmination of diplomatic processes that began before her birth, influenced by political developments that occurred before her parents met, shaped by economic forces that trace their origins to events that predate the castle's construction. Her individual preferences will receive consideration, but they must be balanced against family interests that encompass not just immediate relatives, but extended networks of alliance and obligation that determine the family's position within the larger hierarchy of noble society. The children that Margaret will someday bear within these same chambers will inherit not just material wealth, but the accumulated reputation and responsibility that each generation either enhances or diminishes through choices made under pressures that never entirely disappear. The bloodline's continuation depends upon each generation's ability to navigate successfully between competing demands of honor and pragmatism, tradition and innovation, individual desire and collective welfare. The servants who will raise Margaret's children carry within their own memories the secrets and scandals, triumphs and tragedies that have shaped previous generations of the family they serve. They know which marriages proved happy and which endured only through duty, which children fulfilled their parents' hopes and which brought disappointment or disgrace. Their discretion preserves family reputation, while their wisdom helps each new generation avoid repeating mistakes that have already extracted their price in suffering. The lands that will someday come under Margaret's influence as wife and mother represent not just economic assets, but communities of families whose welfare depends upon noble leadership that balances exploitation with protection, profit with responsibility. The peasants who till fields owned by her family depend upon lords who understand that short-term advantage must be balanced against long-term sustainability, that harsh treatment of tenants may increase immediate revenue while destroying the foundation of future prosperity. The castle itself serves as both stage and witness for the human drama that unfolds within its walls across generations that measure change, not in years but in decades, not in individual lifetimes but in the longer rhythms that govern the rise and fall of families, the shifting of political alliances, the gradual evolution of customs and expectations that define each era's particular character. The stones that shelter Margaret's sleeping form have absorbed the dreams and nightmares of dozens of children who lay in similar cradles, who played similar games, who faced similar challenges and opportunities. Some grew to achieve greatness that brought honor to their bloodline and benefit to their communities. Others fell short of expectations through weakness or misfortune, serving as cautionary examples that remind each new generation that nobility of birth provides opportunity rather than guarantee. The tapestries that warm the walls of Margaret's nursery depict scenes of heroic achievement and romantic fulfillment, providing visual inspiration for aspirations that each generation must pursue through paths that lead across uncertain terrain toward destinations that cannot be predicted with confidence. The stories they tell speak to eternal themes of courage tested by adversity, love triumphant over obstacles, wisdom gained through suffering endured with dignity. As night settles over the castle and Margaret sleeps surrounded by the accumulated love and protection of all who share responsibility for her welfare, the ancient stones hold within their crystalline hearts the hopes and dreams that each generation invests in those who will carry forward the bloodline's destiny. The continuity they provide creates bridges across time that connect past achievement to future possibility, ensuring that individual mortality becomes merely transition rather than termination in stories that encompass far more than any single lifetime can contain. The dawn that will wake Margaret to new discoveries and challenges illuminates walls that have witnessed the childhood of dozens of previous generations, each leaving their mark in the accumulated patina of human presence that transforms mere architecture into home, mere buildings into repositories of heritage that provide identity and purpose to those blessed with birth, into lineages that measure their success across centuries. When the morning sun rises blood red through smoke that carries the acrid scent of burning villages, when the horizon bristles with the banners of an army whose numbers seem to stretch beyond counting, when the very air vibrates with the drumbeat of marching feet and the thunder of hooves that shake the earth like the approach of judgment itself, the castle faces its ultimate test, the trial that will determine whether its walls shelter civilization or merely delay its destruction. Lord Edmund stands upon the battlements that his grandfather's grandfather built to withstand precisely such moments as this, his eyes scanning the enemy host that spreads across the landscape like a plague of locusts whose appetite consumes everything in its path. The banners that flutter in the morning breeze carry devices he recognizes. The Black Wolf of Baron Mortimer, whose grudge against the Fitzwilliam line traces its roots to a slight delivered 3 generations past. The Golden Eagle of Duke Aldrich, whose ambitions encompass territories that include these very lands. The Silver Serpent of Lord Blackwood, whose alliance with enemies of the crown makes him doubly dangerous. The army that has come to claim his heritage outnumbers his defenders by margins that would terrify a lesser man, but Edmund has been bred for moments such as this. His education encompassed not just the diplomatic skills needed for peaceful governance, but the martial knowledge required when diplomacy fails and survival depends upon the effective application of violence. The siege engines that lumber toward his walls like mechanical beasts of prey represent technology refined through centuries of warfare between those who build fortifications and those who seek to destroy them. Lady Isabel moves through the castle with calm efficiency that betrays no hint of the fear that gnaws at every thinking person's heart when death approaches with banners flying and trumpets sounding. Her preparations encompass not just the practical necessities of siege defense, but the psychological requirements of maintaining morale among defenders who must find courage to face odds that rational calculation would declare hopeless. The children who depend upon her protection receive reassurances delivered with conviction that draws strength from sources deeper than mere optimism. The Great Hall, which only yesterday hosted evening meals, marked by laughter and casual conversation, transforms into a military headquarters where every decision carries consequences measured in blood rather than gold. The maps spread across tables that once held wedding feasts now display defensive positions and potential vulnerabilities, marked with symbols that represent human lives rather than abstract strategic considerations. The servants who yesterday concerned themselves with tasks as mundane as changing rushes and preparing meals now face responsibilities that could determine whether their families survive or perish. Meg Fletcher finds herself appointed to supervise the rationing of food supplies that must last through a siege whose duration cannot be predicted with any certainty. The stores that seemed abundant when measured against normal consumption dwindle to worrying inadequacy when calculated against the weeks or months that siege warfare can consume. Master Cook Godwin adapts his skills to circumstances that transform feeding the castle community from routine service into strategic necessity. The bread that emerges from his ovens must provide maximum nutrition from minimal ingredients, requiring techniques that stretch scarce supplies without sacrificing the nourishment that will maintain defenders' strength through trials that may push human endurance beyond normal limits. The preservation methods that seemed merely prudent when applied to seasonal abundance become literally life-saving when applied to siege rationing. Brother Aldrich leads prayers that acknowledge divine authority over outcomes that human effort alone cannot guarantee, but his sermons emphasize the active cooperation with providence that faith demands rather than passive resignation to whatever fate might bring. The chapel fills with souls seeking spiritual strength to face trials that test not just physical courage, but the deeper resources of character that determine how individuals respond when confronted with mortality's immediate presence. The weapons that line the castle's armory receive blessing that recognizes their transformed purpose, no longer tools of training or ceremonial display, but instruments upon which lives and liberty depend. The crossbows that will send bolts toward enemy hearts receive the same benediction as the swords that will taste blood before this siege concludes. The prayers that accompany these blessings acknowledge the tragic necessity of violence employed in defense of innocence, while seeking divine guidance for hands that must shed blood in service of righteous cause. Sir Marcus organizes the castle's military response with expertise gained through campaigns that taught him to read the subtle signs that separate effective siegecraft from mere intimidation. The enemy engines that approach his walls follow patterns he recognizes, their positioning revealing intentions that experienced eyes can interpret like books written in wood and iron. The engineers who direct their construction possess skills that command respect even from those who must find ways to defeat their efforts. The catapults that hurl stones against walls, built to withstand such attacks, speak to the eternal contest between those who create and those who destroy. The defenders who line the battlements respond with crossbow volleys that seek enemy engineers and officers whose deaths might disrupt coordination essential to siege success. The quarrels that fly toward enemy targets carry with them the hopes and prayers of all who depend upon defenders' accuracy, each shot representing both tactical necessity and desperate hope that skill might triumph over numbers. Young William, who only weeks ago struggled with training swords in practice yards, now faces real combat against enemies whose weapons carry death rather than instruction. The boy's first taste of blood comes when his crossbow bolt finds its mark in an enemy engineer whose fall delays the positioning of a siege engine by precious minutes that might mean the difference between successful defense and catastrophic breach. The walls themselves become participants in the struggle, their massive stones absorbing impact from projectiles while returning defiance through the very solidity that speaks to builders' confidence in their craft. The mortar that binds stone to stone proves its worth through resistance that transforms destroying force into harmless energy dispersed across structure designed to endure such tests. As days blend into nights marked by constant vigilance, the siege settles into rhythms that test endurance rather than merely courage. The sentries who must maintain alertness through hours when exhaustion weighs upon consciousness like lead discover reserves of determination they never knew they possessed. The women who tend wounds that speak to warfare's grim reality develop skills that no peaceful education could provide. The children who should concern themselves with games and lessons instead learn lessons about survival that will mark their characters for whatever lifetimes remain to them. Little Margaret, barely old enough to understand the danger that surrounds her, nevertheless absorbs through observation the examples of adult behavior under pressure that will influence her own responses to future crises. The food rationing that seemed merely prudent when first implemented becomes genuine hardship as siege weeks stretch toward months and supplies dwindle toward adequacy's edge. The bread that provides daily sustenance grows coarser as better grains are exhausted and inferior substitutes replace ingredients that once seemed inexhaustible. The well that provides the castle's water supply assumes importance that no peacetime resident could have imagined. The engineers who designed its depth and protection against contamination prove their worth through crisis that tests every aspect of defensive preparation. The guards who protect approaches to this vital resource understand that their vigilance may determine whether the siege ends in victory or in catastrophe, brought about by thirst rather than assault. The enemy's attempts at undermining the walls through tunnels that approach like underground serpents require countermeasures that pit engineering skill against engineering, skill in contests whose outcomes remain invisible until the moment when success or failure reveals itself through catastrophic results. The defenders who descend into darkness to fight battles that daylight never illuminates discover courage that emerges only when normal supports are stripped away. The negotiations that punctuate siege warfare with brief intervals of parley reveal the political calculations that underlie military action. The terms offered by besiegers speak to their assessment of defensive strength and their own willingness to accept casualties in pursuit of objectives that may encompass far more than mere territorial acquisition. The responses provided by defenders must balance realistic assessment of military situation with psychological requirements of maintaining morale among those whose lives depend upon continued resistance. As winter approaches and the siege shows no signs of resolution, both attackers and defenders face challenges that nature imposes upon human conflict with sublime indifference to political ambitions or personal courage. The storms that bring snow and ice affect besiegers and besieged alike, forcing modifications to siegecraft that expose weaknesses in planning based upon assumptions about weather's cooperation with military timetables. The diseases that flourish when large numbers of people live in close proximity with inadequate sanitation claim victims from both armies, reminding all participants that death serves no banners and recognizes no allegiances beyond the universal human vulnerability to forces that care nothing for courage or nobility. The physicians who tend the sick and wounded discover that healing becomes sacred calling when practiced under conditions that strip away everything except essential humanity. The moments of beauty that persist even amid siege's horror provide reminders that human spirit possesses resources that warfare cannot destroy. The sunset that paints besiegers and besieged alike in light that transcends their temporary enmity speaks to eternal truths that outlast political conflicts. The music that rises from the chapel during evening prayers carries over siege lines to reach enemies who share the same faith and the same ultimate destination, regardless of which banners they currently follow. When the siege finally breaks through resolution that combines military necessity with political wisdom, both sides count costs that exceed any victory's value, measured in purely material terms. The dead, who will never see their families again, leave absences that wealth cannot fill. The wounded, who will carry siege scars for whatever years remain to them, serve as living reminders that warfare's price includes payment in suffering that extends far beyond battlefields. Yet within the castle walls that have proven their worth through trial by fire and iron, there emerges understanding that survival depends not just upon stone and mortar, but upon bonds between human souls that crisis reveals rather than creates. The community that endures siege together carries forward relationships tempered by shared danger, strengthened by mutual dependence, enriched by knowledge that they faced ultimate test and proved worthy of the heritage they defended. The victory that ends the siege brings not celebration, but solemn gratitude for deliverance that came through human effort blessed by divine providence. The stones that sheltered life through months of mortal danger now embrace peace with the same patient strength they showed during warfare's testing, ready to provide foundation for whatever futures those they protected may choose to build upon foundations that trial has proven secure. In the aftermath of siege, when the enemy banners have retreated beyond the horizon and silence settles over battlements that so recently rang with the clash of arms, the castle awakens to a victory measured not in territory gained or enemies defeated, but in the deeper triumph of community bonds forged in fire and tempered by shared ordeal into something stronger than mere stone and mortar could ever provide. The dawn that breaks over walls scarred by siege engines and pocked with the marks of countless quarrels brings light that seems different from any that illuminated the castle in peacetime cleaner. Somehow, as if crisis has burned away illusions to reveal truths that prosperity's comfort had obscured. Lord Edmund walks the battlements where so recently death flew on iron wings, his steps echoing with reverence appropriate to ground consecrated by sacrifice willingly offered in defense of principles larger than individual survival. The repairs that begin immediately speak to more than mere restoration of defensive capability. The stones that replace those shattered by enemy engines are set with ceremonies that acknowledge the sacred nature of walls that proved their worth through trial by combat. The mortar that binds new stone to old is mixed with earth, blessed by prayers that recognize divine protection manifested through human courage and divine providence working through mortal hands. Lady Isabel moves through chambers where siege's hardships created bonds between people whose peacetime relationships had been governed by protocols of rank and station. That crisis revealed as artificial barriers obscuring deeper human connections. The servant who shared her last crust of bread with a noble child during the siege's hungriest days has earned status that no ceremony could confer, recognition that springs from gratitude too profound for formal expression. The kitchens, which during siege became centers of careful rationing and anxious calculation, now resume their role as heart of castle hospitality, with understanding transformed by experience of what abundance truly means. Master Cook Godwin greets the return of familiar ingredients with joy that seems excessive until measured against memories of making do with substitutes that challenged both creativity and courage. The bread that emerges from ovens once again supplied with proper flour carries flavor enhanced by recollection of darker loaves that sustained life when better was impossible. The children who lived through siege with courage that shamed many adults emerge from the experience, changed in ways that will influence their characters throughout whatever years remain to them. Young Margaret, though still too young for conscious memory of events that surrounded her infancy, nevertheless carries within her developing awareness the subtle influences of adults whose behavior under pressure provided examples of nobility that no formal education could duplicate. The weapons that tasted blood in defense of home and family receive retirement to armory positions marked by ceremony that acknowledges their transformation from tools of practice to instruments of salvation. The crossbows that sent death toward enemies threatening innocent lives are cleaned and oiled with reverence appropriate to relics whose service transcended mere mechanical function to achieve something approaching sacred purpose. Brother Aldrich leads Thanksgiving services that seek to balance gratitude for deliverance with humility befitting those who understand that victory came through grace rather than merit, through providence working through human agency rather than through human effort alone. The prayers that rise from the chapel carry weight different from peacetime worship, seasoned by experience of mortality's immediate presence, and enriched by knowledge of divine protection manifested when human resources reach their limits. The servants whose loyalty proved absolute when tested by conditions that would have justified flight carry themselves with dignity earned through trial rather than granted through birth. Meg Fletcher, who organized rationing with wisdom that prevented starvation when siege stretched toward months, receives recognition that transcends formal reward to achieve acknowledgement of worth measured by contribution rather than station. The friendships forged during siege nights, when shared danger created intimacy that peacetime's leisurely pace could never have achieved, continue to develop with intensity that speaks to bonds created by facing mortality together. The knight who shared his water ration with a servant's sick child during the siege's most desperate hours finds himself welcomed into relationships that cross social boundaries with trust earned through sacrifice witnessed rather than merely proclaimed. The correspondence that begins to arrive from neighboring lords carries congratulations that mask careful calculations about what the castle's successful defense means for regional power balances and future alliance possibilities. The victory that seemed complete when measured against the immediate threat of conquest reveals itself as merely the first move in larger games of politics and diplomacy that operate according to rules more complex than siege warfare's brutal simplicities. The merchants who return to castle markets bring goods that seem miraculous after months of making do with stores supplemented by whatever creativity could devise from dwindling supplies. The spices that once seemed mere luxury now carry the preciousness of things whose absence taught appreciation that abundance had obscured. The silks that provide material for new garments speak to renewal that encompasses more than mere replacement of items worn or damaged during siege. The craftsmen who repair siege damage work with understanding, deepened by seeing their creations tested under conditions more severe than any peacetime stress could provide. The master mason who rebuilds walls damaged by enemy engines incorporates lessons learned from observing how stone and mortar responded to forces designed to destroy them. The improvements that emerge from reconstruction speak to wisdom purchased with experience that no theoretical knowledge could have provided. The marriages that take place in the months following siege's end carry emotional weight enhanced by shared experience of mortality faced together. The couples who exchange vows in the chapel where they once prayed for deliverance from enemies threatening their very existence enter partnerships blessed by knowledge that their love survived testing under conditions that destroyed weaker bonds. Their children will inherit not just material prosperity, but the legacy of parents whose commitment proved absolute when measured against ultimate pressure. The harvest that follows siege brings abundance that seems miraculous to those who learned during rationing to measure grain by the handful rather than the bushel. The fields that enemy forces might have devastated instead yield crops that speak to divine blessing manifested through natural processes that continued their eternal cycle despite human conflict's temporary disruption. The granaries that fill with new harvest carry security that can only be fully appreciated by those who have known the fear of watching stores dwindle toward exhaustion. The education of children resumes, with curricula modified by understanding of what knowledge proves most valuable when survival becomes immediate concern rather than abstract possibility. The lessons in Latin and logic continue, but they are supplemented by practical skills that Siege taught could mean the difference between life and death when normal support systems collapse. The boys learn weaponscraft with seriousness that peacetime training could never have instilled, while girls master healing arts with appreciation for skills that peace makes optional but crisis renders essential. The celebrations that mark feast days carry joy enhanced by memory of times when celebration seemed impossible, luxury that survival left no room to contemplate. The music that fills the hall during evening gatherings resonates with harmonies that speak to community bonds strengthened rather than weakened by shared ordeal. The dancing that follows feasts moves to rhythms that express gratitude for life preserved and hope for futures that crisis made precious by demonstrating their fragility. The letters that carry news of the siege's successful conclusion to allies and relatives, scattered across distant territories, become instruments of diplomatic influence that extends the castle's importance beyond its immediate region. The reputation earned through successful defense against overwhelming odds creates respect that peacetime prosperity could never have achieved, establishing the Fitzwilliam name among those whose courage has been tested and proven absolute. As seasons turn and siege memories begin to acquire the patina that time provides to all human experience, the castle settles into rhythms that incorporate lessons learned through trial, while maintaining the basic patterns that give meaning and structure to civilized life. The victory that seemed complete when enemy banners disappeared beyond the horizon reveals itself as merely the foundation for future achievements built upon confidence earned through surviving the ultimate test of faith, courage, and community bonds that prove stronger than the forces arrayed against them. The stones that weathered siege maintain their vigil with patience enriched by proven effectiveness, ready to shelter future generations who will inherit not just material security, but the spiritual legacy of ancestors who faced the darkness and emerged victorious through grace that worked through human courage to achieve triumph that transforms mere survival into victory, worthy of celebration across generations yet unborn. As evening light settles once more upon battlements that have witnessed the full circle of human experience, as shadows lengthen across courtyards where children play games unchanged since their great-grandfather's time, the stones themselves seem to exhale with the satisfaction of structures that have fulfilled their deepest purpose. Not merely to shelter bodies, but to nurture souls. Not merely to exclude enemies, but to embrace the eternal human quest for meaning that transcends individual mortality. The castle stands in the gathering twilight, like a prayer made manifest in limestone and mortar, its towers reaching towards stars that have watched over countless generations of dreamers and builders, lovers and warriors, saints and sinners who found within these walls the space necessary for human life to achieve its highest possibilities. Each stone carries within its crystalline heart the accumulated wisdom of all who shaped it to purpose, all who trusted their lives to its protection, all who found within its embrace the courage to face whatever challenges their times demanded. In the Lord's chamber, where the cycle of authority continues its ancient rhythm, The newest heir to responsibility sits where his father sat before him, understanding with clarity that comes only through testing that power serves purpose greater than personal ambition. The decisions he makes in this room will ripple outward through time like waves spreading from stones cast into still water, affecting lives not yet born and shaping futures that stretch beyond imagination's reach. In the Lady's Solar, where feminine wisdom governs through influence rather than command, another generation learns the delicate arts of nurturing community bonds that prove stronger than iron when tested by forces that would tear apart societies built on lesser foundations. The tapestries that warm these walls tell stories that will be retold to children yet unborn, carrying forward the accumulated wisdom of women who understood that true strength lies not in the power to command, but in the ability to inspire others to achieve their highest potential. In the chapel, where morning and evening prayers mark time's passage with rhythms older than human memory, Brother Aldrich's successor will lead worship that connects individual souls to eternal purposes that give meaning to temporal struggles. The prayers that rise from this sacred space carry with them the hopes and fears of all who seek in divine mystery the foundation for human meaning that merely earthly concerns could never provide. In the kitchen, where nourishment transforms raw materials into sustenance for both body and soul, future generations of cooks will practice arts that speak to humanity's power, to create beauty from necessity, to transform survival into celebration through skill and care that honor both the gifts of earth and the needs of those who depend upon their labor. In the servants' quarters, where dignity earned through service proves more enduring than privilege inherited through accident of birth, the democracy of human worth continues to manifest itself through lives lived in service to purposes larger than personal advancement. The bonds forged between those who share common labor create communities that outlast the political structures they serve. Upon the walls, where watchers maintain eternal vigil against forces that threaten the peace within, future generations of guards will scan horizons that stretch toward territories where other communities struggle with the same eternal challenges of creating islands of order within seas of chaos that forever threaten to overwhelm human achievement. In the marketplace, where commerce weaves bonds that connect distant communities through networks of mutual dependence and shared prosperity, the exchange of goods continues to facilitate the exchange of ideas that drives human progress forward through innovations that build upon foundations laid by previous generations of craftsmen and traders. The seasons that turn like pages in a book whose story never ends will continue to test and renew the community that these stones shelter. Each cycle bringing challenges that require responses, drawing upon wisdom accumulated through all the centuries that preceded this moment. The spring that awakens dormant life speaks to eternal hope that survives even winter's harshest trials. The summer that brings abundance reminds all who witness it that divine generosity provides foundation for human prosperity. The autumn that demands preparation for hardship ahead teaches lessons about foresight and community cooperation that prove essential when testing comes. The winter that strips away illusion reveals the eternal truths that survive when temporary supports fail. The generations that will grow to maturity within these walls will inherit not just material wealth, but spiritual legacy enriched by all who came before them. The children who take their first steps across floors worn smooth by ancestral footsteps walk paths illuminated by examples of courage, tested in crucible of actual trial, wisdom gained through experience of real consequence, love proven through sacrifice willingly offered when alternatives would have been easier but less worthy. The stories that will be told in the hall, when evening fires cast dancing shadows upon walls that have heard 10,000 such tales, will add new chapters to chronicles that stretch back to the castle's founding and forward to futures that imagination cannot encompass. Each generation will contribute its own verses to the endless poem of human striving that these stones have witnessed and will continue to witness as long as their mortar holds and their foundations remain secure. The marriages that will be celebrated, the children that will be born, the deaths that will be mourned, the victories that will be won, the defeats that will be endured, all will add their weight to the accumulated experience that transforms mere architecture into something approaching sacred space, where human life achieves connection to purposes that transcend individual existence. In the pre-dawn darkness that precedes each new beginning, when silence settles over the castle like a blessing that prepares souls for whatever challenges daylight may bring, the stones themselves seem to pulse with life that draws its energy not from any single source, but from the accumulated vitality of all who have ever called this place home. They have sheltered saints and sinners, heroes and cowards, geniuses and fools, understanding with patience that only geological timescales can provide, that human worth cannot be measured by temporary success or failure, but only by the willingness to participate in the eternal struggle between forces of creation and destruction, meaning and chaos, love and hatred that defines the human condition. As dawn approaches with its ancient promise of renewal, as light begins to touch the eastern walls with fingers of gold that speak to hope eternal, the castle prepares for another day in its endless life, another opportunity to serve the mysterious purposes that called it into being and that will sustain it until time itself reaches its conclusion. The stones remember everything, every prayer offered, every oath sworn, every tear shed, every laugh shared within their protection. They remember because memory is their gift to the future, their promise that nothing of value will be lost, that every life lived with dignity and purpose adds its weight to the eternal human story that these walls contain, like a great book whose pages never cease to be written. And in that memory lies immortality, not the individual survival that mortal hearts crave, but the deeper permanence that comes from contributing to something larger than oneself, something that will endure as long as stone endures, as long as human hearts continue to beat with hope for better tomorrows built upon the foundations that yesterday's courage provides. The dawn breaks eternal upon stones that remember everything and promise that nothing worthy will be forgotten, that every sacrifice will bear fruit, that every act of love will echo through corridors of time until time itself is no more.